There is a version of Janis Joplin that her audiences never saw. Not the stage version, not the feather boa and the Southern comfort and the voice that stopped rooms cold, not the Port Arthur wound given full volume, not any version that a camera or a microphone or a concert ticket ever captured. The version that wrote letters home. Every week from 1966 until the last week of her life, Dorothy Joplin wrote a letter to her daughter. And every week, from hotel rooms and tour buses and San Francisco apartments and Los Angeles studios, Janis Joplin wrote back. Laura Joplin, Janis's younger sister, collected those letters and published them in a book called Love, Janis in 1992. The book is still in print. The letters are still there. They contain someone that the world, which knew Janis Joplin primarily through her performances and her legend, did not fully know was there. A daughter, trying to explain herself to her mother, trying across the miles between San Francisco and Port Arthur to remain connected to the place and the person she had come from. Dorothy East Joplin was born in 1913 in Amarillo, Texas. She married Seth Ward Joplin in 1940. They settled in Port Arthur on the Gulf Coast, where Seth worked at Texaco. She was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, a careful and intelligent woman. She had graduated near the top of her high school class. She had enrolled in Texas Christian University. She had plans. The plans changed in the way that plans change in the 1940s for women who married and had children. She became a wife and then a mother. First Janis, then Michael, then Laura. She channeled her considerable intelligence into making a home in a Gulf Coast oil town that was not especially interested in intelligence. She loved her children, and of her 3 children, the one who caused her the most complicated feelings was the oldest one. Janis Joplin left Port Arthur for the first time in 1963. She came back. She left again in 1966, this time for good. She went to San Francisco. She joined Big Brother and the holding company, and she started writing home. Laura Joplin, in her introduction to the letters, describes what it was like to be in the household that received those letters. The specific quality of a Port Arthur house receiving news from a completely different world. The letters arrived, and the family read them and tried to picture what Janis was describing and could not always manage it. But Dorothy wrote back every time, and Janis wrote back every time after that. For 4 years, the letters from Janis to her family are, by the consensus of everyone who has read them, one of the most remarkable documents of the era. Not because they are polished writing, they are not. They are handwritten letters, rushed sometimes, careful sometimes, the ordinary correspondence of someone who is trying to maintain a connection while living at full speed. But they show a Janis Joplin who is almost entirely absent from the public record. She is thoughtful in them. She explains her choices, the music, the lifestyle, the specific reasons she cannot live the life Port Arthur wanted her to live, with a directness and intelligence that her public image did not always convey. She is affectionate. She asks about her brother and sister. She asks about the house. She tells her mother what she has been eating and where she has been sleeping and how the shows have been going. She is, in these letters, a daughter, not a rock star, not a legend, not the woman who stopped the world at Monterey. A daughter writing home from a hotel room. Dorothy's letters to Janis did not survive in the same way. Janis was on the road constantly, living in rented rooms and shared houses and hotel beds. The infrastructure for keeping things safe was not available to her in the way it was available to Dorothy in Port Arthur, in a house with a drawer. But from what Laura Joplin has described of her mother's correspondence, Dorothy wrote with the specific voice of a woman who was trying very hard to understand something she had not been prepared to understand. She worried about the drugs. She said so carefully. She worried about the lifestyle. She did not always have the vocabulary for the Haight-Ashbury world she was trying to picture from her daughter's letters. But she kept writing. Every week the letter went out from Port Arthur, and every week the letter came back from wherever Janis was. That was the agreement. Unspoken, never articulated, but as real as any contract. You write, I write back. We stay connected across whatever this distance is. One letter, written in 1967, contains a line that Laura Joplin has quoted in interviews about her sister. Janis wrote, "I know you don't understand all of it, Mama. I'm not sure I understand all of it either, but I know that when I sing, it's the one time I'm not confused about who I am." She was 24 years old. She had just performed at Monterey. She was the most famous female rock singer in America, and she was writing to her mother in Port Arthur to explain why the thing she was doing, the thing that had confused and frightened her family, the thing that had taken her away from everything she was supposed to be, was the one place where she was not confused. Dorothy saved that letter. She saved all of them. In August 1970, Janis went back to Port Arthur for her 10-year high school reunion. Dorothy was there. The family was there. It was one of the few times across the 4 years since Janis had left for good that mother and daughter were in the same room. The distance that the letters had bridged was temporarily not a distance. They were in the same house, at the same table, in the same city. Laura Joplin has described that reunion visit as complicated in the way that returns always are complicated. The person who left has become someone the family recognizes and does not fully recognize simultaneously. Janis was the daughter Dorothy had raised. She was also someone Dorothy had not raised. The stage version, the feather boa, the queen of rock and roll, both of those people were in the house that August. Dorothy was proud. She was also frightened. She had been frightened for years, watching from Port Arthur as the letters described a life that seemed to be moving faster than any life should move. She did not say this in the way of parents who withhold. She said it in her letters. She said she worried. She said she prayed. She said she wanted Janis to take care of herself. Janis said she was trying. The last letter Janis wrote home was in late September or early October 1970. She was in Los Angeles. The Pearl sessions were almost done. The album was extraordinary. She knew it was the best thing she had ever made. The tour was being planned. Everything pointed forward. She wrote to her mother. She told her about the album. She told her about the plans. She told her she would be home at some point, not soon, but at some point, and they would sit at the kitchen table and she would play her some of the new songs. She mailed the letter. On October 4th, 1970, Janis Joplin died in room 105 of the Landmark Motor Hotel in Los Angeles. Dorothy Joplin received the news by telephone, not by letter, not in the ordinary way that news arrived in the Joplin household. Dorothy Joplin lived until 1998. She was 84 years old when she died. She kept every letter, every single one, for 4 years. The letters that came from wherever Janis was, hotel rooms in San Francisco and tour buses in New York and Los Angeles, and everywhere the music took her, Dorothy had kept. Laura Joplin used those letters as the basis for Love, Janis. She published them alongside her own memories of her sister, creating a portrait of Janis that the public performances and the legend had not made possible. The portrait of a daughter, not a rock star. A daughter, writing home, trying to explain who she was to the person who had known her the longest, and understood her the least, and loved her the most. Here is what this story asks you. Is there someone in your life you have been trying to explain yourself to? Not to justify yourself, not to defend yourself, just to be known by, really known, in the way that only certain people can know us. Janis Joplin wrote home every week for 4 years, not because she had to, not because the letters were easy to write, because the connection was real and the connection required maintenance and she was not willing to let it go, even when the distance between the worlds was enormous. Dorothy wrote back every week because her daughter was out there and the letters were the thread. The last letter came. The response did not. Dorothy kept every one of them. They are still there, in a book, in an archive, in the specific place where private things go when the people who wrote them are gone and the people who saved them understand that something should not be lost. Janis Joplin wrote home every week. That is not the version of her that the world knows. It is the truest version of all. Subscribe. The next story goes somewhere nobody has taken you before.